In this episode, we take workforce impact analysis and turn it into something that actually gets resourced, because recognizing capability gaps is not the same as closing them. Beginners often assume that if a training need is real, leadership will automatically support it, but leadership usually funds what is clear, tied to risk, and connected to measurable outcomes. AI makes this more urgent because changes in work are happening quickly, and the cost of mistakes can be high, not only in money but in trust and harm to people. Translating workforce impacts into training plans means connecting job shifts, role risks, and capability gaps to a concrete plan that explains who needs training, what they need to be able to do, how the organization will know training worked, and what happens if training is not done. This is not about selling training with hype. It is about presenting training as a control that reduces likelihood and impact of harm. When leaders see training as risk reduction with measurable benefits, they are far more likely to fund it. The goal is to learn how to build that kind of plan in a practical, realistic way. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first step is framing training as a response to specific workforce-driven risk pathways rather than as a generic request for education. Leaders tend to hear broad statements like people need to learn AI and translate them into optional professional development. A governance-minded plan instead connects training to a risk statement, such as users may overtrust outputs and take harmful actions without review, or teams may share sensitive data and prompts because they do not recognize data boundaries. Those are workforce behaviors, and training is one of the most direct ways to change them, especially when paired with clear procedures. Beginners should notice that the language matters, because leaders can evaluate risk statements more easily than abstract training desires. If you can explain that a capability gap increases likelihood of a high-impact harm, you have created a funding argument grounded in prevention. That argument becomes even stronger when you connect it to obligations like privacy, consumer protection, or internal governance commitments. A good training plan, therefore, begins with a short, clear description of the workforce impact and the risk it creates, in terms leaders can understand. Once the risk is framed, the next step is defining the target audiences by role and responsibility, not by department name. Leaders fund training more readily when the audience is specific and the purpose is clear, because it looks like an operational investment rather than a broad initiative. For AI governance, common audience groups include general users, high-impact decision users, content publishers, builders, reviewers, risk owners, and incident responders. Each group needs different capabilities, and mixing them into one class produces weak results and wasted time. Beginners should also recognize that audience definition is a controlled design choice, because a role-based plan reduces the chance that the wrong people receive the wrong message. If a plan says everyone needs the same training, leaders may suspect it is unfocused. If a plan says these roles need these skills because they perform these policy-required tasks, leaders can see the logic. A clear audience map also helps estimate effort and cost, which is part of funding reality. Leaders prefer plans that show you have thought about scale and feasibility, not just ideals. After identifying audiences, you translate workforce impacts into learning objectives that are behavioral and testable, because leaders fund what can be measured. A vague objective like understand responsible AI is not convincing, because it cannot be verified. A stronger objective is that users can identify prohibited data types and choose the correct action when uncertain, or that reviewers can evaluate a risk assessment and confirm required evidence exists before approving a deployment. Beginners should notice that these objectives are not academic. They are operational, because they describe what someone must be able to do in a real workflow. Objectives should also match the policy and procedures, because training is meant to drive compliance behavior, not just general awareness. When objectives are tied to concrete decisions and actions, you can later test whether training succeeded. Leaders like that because it supports accountability and demonstrates return on investment. It also prevents training from becoming a box-checking exercise that looks complete but changes nothing. The plan becomes credible when it shows what competence looks like. A critical part of making leaders fund training is explaining how the training reduces risk in a way that is proportional to impact. High-impact contexts, where AI influences decisions about individuals or safety-critical outcomes, require deeper training, more practice, and stronger verification of competence. Lower-impact uses can be handled with lighter awareness and clear guardrails. Beginners should see that proportionality is both a governance principle and a cost control principle, because it avoids overtraining where the risk is low and undertraining where the risk is high. If you present a plan that gives the same depth to every audience, leaders may see it as inefficient. If you present a plan that invests more in the roles that create the highest likelihood of harm, leaders can see that resources are being allocated rationally. Proportionality also helps with scheduling, because high-impact roles can receive more intensive sessions while low-impact roles receive shorter, targeted guidance. This makes the plan feel operationally feasible. A leader is more likely to fund a plan that respects time constraints while protecting critical outcomes. Another key translation step is turning capability gaps into training content themes that match real work scenarios. If the workforce impact analysis shows that people are shifting from doing work to reviewing AI outputs, the training should focus on review skills, such as spotting inconsistencies, checking assumptions, and recognizing when to escalate. If the analysis shows that people are using AI in time-pressure contexts, the training should focus on decision boundaries and safe shortcuts, such as when outputs may be used and when they must be verified. If the analysis shows that shadow use is growing, training should focus on scope, approval triggers, and the reasons behind restrictions, so users understand why governance exists. Beginners should notice that scenario-based teaching is powerful because it reduces ambiguity. People often fail policy awareness because they cannot map abstract rules onto real situations, and scenarios bridge that gap. A leader is more likely to fund training that clearly addresses real mistakes the organization wants to prevent, rather than training that feels theoretical. When you can say this content targets the top failure patterns we see, you are speaking in an operational risk language. Leaders also fund training more readily when the plan includes delivery methods that match how people actually learn and work. Some content is best delivered as short, repeated reinforcement that people can absorb quickly, while other content needs deeper sessions with practice. Beginners should notice that AI governance training is not just about information transfer. It is about behavior change, which often requires repetition and feedback. A plan that includes only a single annual module may look cheap, but it is often ineffective, which makes it a poor investment. A stronger plan combines baseline awareness for everyone with targeted deeper training for key roles, plus refreshers and updates when policies or tools change. It also connects training moments to workflow triggers, such as onboarding, access requests, and deployment approvals. Leaders like this because it looks like a system that will stay current and reduce incidents over time. It also reduces the risk of training fatigue by delivering the right amount to the right people at the right time. A plan that fits operational rhythms is more likely to be funded because it is more likely to work. Measurement is where many training plans fail to win funding because they do not define how success will be evaluated beyond completion. Leaders want to know how training investment reduces incidents, reduces policy violations, or improves decision quality. Beginners should understand that measurement can be simple and still meaningful, such as checking whether users can correctly classify data sensitivity, whether approval processes are used more consistently, or whether incident reports occur earlier rather than later. Measurement can also include quality checks for reviewers, such as whether reviews include required evidence and whether conditions are enforced. Another measurement is the pattern of exceptions, because if exceptions decline after training, that suggests improved compliance and planning. The goal is not to create surveillance. It is to create evidence that training is improving governance behavior. When you present leaders with a plan that includes clear metrics, you make funding easier because you offer accountability. You also create a way to improve the plan over time because metrics reveal where misunderstandings persist. A funded plan often needs to show it will evolve rather than remain static. A training plan leaders will fund also anticipates the cost of not training because prevention is easier to justify when the alternative is clear. The cost of not training might include privacy incidents from accidental data sharing, harmful decisions from overtrust, inconsistent approvals that create compliance exposure, or killing that reduces resilience during incidents. Beginners should notice that these costs can be described in terms of harm, likelihood, and impact, which makes them consistent with the risk management approach. For example, if high-impact teams use AI outputs without understanding limitations, the likelihood of a harmful decision may be significant and the impact could be severe. Training reduces that likelihood by improving classification, review, and escalation behaviors. Leaders respond to this because it makes training look like a control with a clear risk reduction function, similar to other controls like monitoring or access restriction. When you make the cost of inaction visible, training becomes a responsible investment rather than a nice-to-have. This is especially true when the organization has public trust obligations or operates in regulated environments. Another part of making the plan fundable is showing that training integrates with governance rather than existing as a separate activity. If policies require approvals, training should prepare people to follow the approval process correctly. If procedures require documentation, training should teach what documentation is expected and why it matters. If incident response expects early reporting, training should teach what to report and what will happen after reporting. Beginners should see that integration reduces friction because people are not asked to learn something that does not match their workflows. It also increases compliance because training becomes a bridge into procedures rather than a separate obligation. Leaders are more likely to fund integrated training because it supports the governance system they are trying to build. It also reduces redundant effort because the same training can support multiple controls and compliance needs. When training is integrated, it becomes part of the operating model, not a temporary campaign. It is also helpful to include a plan for maintaining and updating training, because leaders worry about funding something that becomes obsolete quickly. AI policy changes, tool changes, and regulation changes are all common, and training must adapt or it loses credibility. Beginners should notice that maintenance does not require constant major redesign. It can be a disciplined update process where key messages are reviewed periodically and updated when triggers occur. Triggers might include new tools being introduced, significant incidents, or policy updates. A maintenance plan also includes a way to incorporate lessons learned, because real mistakes reveal where training is not working. Leaders like maintenance plans because they protect the investment by keeping it relevant. They also reduce the chance that the organization will be criticized for having training that exists but does not match reality. A plan that anticipates change looks more mature and therefore more fundable. It signals that the organization is not simply checking a box, but building capability over time. Finally, a fundable training plan acknowledges constraints and prioritizes, because leaders must allocate limited time and money. Beginners should understand that a perfect plan is less important than a realistic plan that can be executed well. Prioritization can be based on harm and impact, focusing first on roles and workflows where mistakes would have the biggest consequences. The plan should also aim to reduce friction, so training is not seen as the enemy of productivity. When training is targeted, time-efficient, and tied to clear outcomes, it is easier to schedule and support. When training is broad, unfocused, and hard to measure, it is easy to postpone and underfund. Leaders are not necessarily against training. They are against unclear commitments with unclear results. If you present a plan that respects operational reality, you increase the chance of funding and successful adoption. Fundable plans are disciplined plans, not sprawling ones. The central takeaway is that translating workforce impacts into training plans leaders will fund requires turning analysis into a clear story of risk reduction with measurable outcomes. You identify job shifts, role risks, and capability gaps, then you tie them to specific harm pathways and the likelihood and impact of mistakes. You define role-based audiences and create behavioral, testable objectives that match policies and procedures. You design delivery methods that fit real workflows and include reinforcement so learning sticks. You define simple but meaningful measures of success beyond completion, and you explain the cost of inaction in terms leaders can evaluate. You integrate training with governance processes, and you plan for maintenance so training stays relevant as tools and rules change. When you do these things, training stops sounding like general education and starts sounding like a control the organization needs in order to use AI safely and credibly over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.